Welcome back to our Forbidden Donut. We're going to finish some things up as far as texturing, and then we're going to move on to animate it really quickly with a modifier cheat so that you don't have to painstakingly animate it yourself. What we're going to do now is sort of play with the base color node right here. And our base color we can change using a color ramp, but the color ramp itself is actually just a modifier. It's just going to change whatever's coming into this factor. So we're going to drag this color to color. So it's going to ramp whatever's coming in, and it's going to change it into ramping from a black to a white value like this. So what we do is we add something to give it some detail, and I'm going to hit Shift A to add and do a Voronoi texture, because there's a lot of different ways to set up a Voronoi texture, and to me they always look the coolest. So what I'm going to do is drag the color into the factor of the color ramp, and that's going to give us this kind of effect, which isn't super desirable. This is set to Euclidean Voronoi, and I actually like the way Manhattan looks in this situation, because if we scale it up you can see it adds some interesting shapes, although that is far too harsh. So all I'm going to do now is click this black value right here. You want to click on this little slider until you see the black color here, and I'm going to brighten that to make it less impactful. So if we brighten that up, you'll see these details become more subtle, and it's kind of like a grime or like a built up dirt or dust. It's probably hard to see if I do it like that. Let's bring it down a little bit like this. And then we have some very interesting, nice details when we do our turnaround. So then what I would like to do is add one more detail before we move on. And I'm actually going to layer this bump in with another texture. We could say that this metal has like an inherent texture in it, you know, like steel has grain. And we're going to, so you can stack bumps, you see, because this accepts a normal. So what we can do is actually take another bump like this and drag its normal up here, and I'll just give us some room by collapsing these so that we can bring our bump right here. Because we're done with our brick texture, we don't need that anymore, so we can just collapse it and let it sit and work for us. So now right here we're going to add a new texture, and you can really play with whatever you'd like. I'm going to use, I have found I liked a wave texture like this, plugging the color into the height, and you'll see what that does is insane. It creates this very weird sort of design, but what we're going to do is actually turn the strength way down, so that's less impactful. First of all, like that, you see these very faint bands now, and that still looks weird because I don't like the bands. I'm going to set it to, or I do like the bands, but I'm going to set it from sine to saw. And what that does is you'll see it creates these sharp fine lines like this, and that's still not really what we want. We're going to turn the scale up so that there's more of them, right? And now we're starting to get something, and then I actually want to distort them right here. And when you distort them, it adds an interesting dimension, and you get a little bit of grain. You can turn your detail up to really put some detail in there. And then you're working with some really cool looking material. The detail scale tends to mess with it. I don't like to turn that up too much. But the strength, you really want it, if you do the modifier that I just used, you really want it quite low. So there's just a subtle effect that adds more detail when your eye gets drawn to this. And you can see it only when you look real close and when the light catches it. So I think that's all we're going to do for effects. This is our node map. It's not too bad, hopefully, for you. I walked through it a little bit. Just ask me if you have any questions, and we're going to go ahead and move on to animating. If you were animating this by hand, you could use the animation tab. I'm going to use the layout tab because it's what we're familiar with and it's kind of general use. So let's go ahead and get up close and personal with this, and we really want to give it a little bit of room to move because we're going to be playing with some values. So let's select our torus, our donut, and hit modifier properties, and I actually have this bevel turned off right now because it can, that's why it might not look, if you turn it on it'll look much better, of course, but when you're animating it, I would turn the bevel off. In the render, the bevel will show up, but when you're just trying to get the look that you like for the movement, there's a good chance your computer's not going to be able to handle that bevel without a lot of fuss. So I'm going to turn just right here in the real time, you want to turn off real time bevel, the little screen, so that it's still there and it's still going to happen in the render because it's turned on with the camera icon, it's turned on in the render, but we're just going to shut it off for our viewport so that we don't kill our PC while we try to animate this. And then let's go ahead and collapse these modifiers because we're just going to add one more to animate it. Also, let's go ahead and position our camera. So if you hit 0, it'll show you where your camera is, and you can select your camera up in the outliner, so it kind of grays out everything that's not in the camera's view. And what I like to do to position my camera is come up here where it says global, the transform orientation, and you can change that to local so that you're moving on the camera's space instead of the world space, you know? So to zoom in and out with the camera in local, we would hit G, Z, and then you can move in and out. So let's get up close to our donut here, and we like this composition, so let's say we want to select it and now add, for the cheat modifier, the modifier that you're going to use to avoid having to animate this by hand, we're going to use a wave, and immediately that makes it look super funny. So if you go down here and you hit play, you're going to see it does something absurd. So let's pause that and go back. So part of the problem is it's too fast, so let's turn the speed way down. I'm going to go with about 0.03, and let's hit play again so we can see what's going on. So this is moving a bit like a jellyfish, and that's to be expected. The wave modifier, it just starts somewhere and then it flows out and kind of makes this pulse. So what we can play with is the variables surrounding that pulse. So we can change the speed of it, we can change how high it is, we can change the distance between the waves or the width between them, and we can change the narrowness, which is the distance between the top and the base of the wave. So as far as our height value, I'm going to bring that down considerably as well, about the same as the speed, to this should work just fine. Really, these values are also just what you like. I like mine to move slow and methodically. I like it to look kind of, you know, cryptic. I'm also going to bring the width down to 0.47 is the value I found that I liked, but really anywhere around there is fine, so 0.43 works. And we kind of have, then it goes continuously because the width decreased, the width between the waves. And then the last thing I want to do is make these actually more narrow. So we're going to turn the narrowness up to about here. And then we have this effect. And I think this looks really nice. And just like that, we're done. And when you want to go ahead and render this, you're just going to come over here to the render properties. And we are in Eevee. Some settings that I personally like. Ambient occlusion. You can toggle that a few times and it makes it look a little bit better. I like a little bit of bloom. I like screen space reflections, which it looks weird right here, but when you actually render it and animate it, it's going to look good. I like, if you go under film, or not film, sorry, color management, this is the single most important thing to making your renders pop and look good to me, I think. I love just leave everything like it is, change the look from none to either high or very high contrast, and just like that you see it gets a very interesting look, and we can hit play and see that that looks quite interesting. So all we really have to do now is, if you like all these settings, you can come here to your output properties and say that you're putting this on, like, I don't know, your Instagram or something. You could just change this resolution. 1080 would be square, and then for a regular resolution 1920 by 1080 is fine, which is the default. And then all you would do is come up here and hit render, render animation, or as you can see right there, Control F12. So just hit render animation and you'll be completely done and you'll have made something I think is kind of neat. Anyways, it's been a blast. If you like the way that I teach, make sure to subscribe and see my link tree in the description for my social media, where I frequently post other models that I've made and interact with the community. I'll see you for the next one.